Thank you all for coming. This is the second presentation in our annual spring seminar series titled Expanding Our Reach in Natural Resources Management. So thank you all for being here today. And this event is sponsored by Wisconsin Center for Wildlife, of course, and then also the College of Natural Resources and our Kennedy Grading Foundation, correct? So, so today we have Steve Swenson, and he's the Director of Conservation at the Aldo Leopold Foundation. The Aldo Leopold Foundation is in Baraboo, Wisconsin, and is an nonprofit organization whose mission is to foster a land ethic through the legacy of Aldo Leopold. So, the Aldo Leopold Foundation, for the students in the room, they offer a number of fellowships, which is essentially kind of like an internship. They're 1 year long, and they're paid with housing provided. So if you are interested in that, be sure to talk to Steve afterwards. So in the meantime, Steve oversees the Science and Stewardship Program of the foundation, which includes Aldo Leopold's Historic Shack, which is a national historic landmark, and the surrounding Leopold-Pine Island Importance Bird Area. It's a partnership of federal, state, and private lands totaling over 12,000 acres. Regionally, Steve coordinates a public-private partnership called My Wisconsin Woods. Through continuous improvement and outreach methods, My Wisconsin Woods inspires land care among previously unengaged landowners. For this project and others, Steve has authored regional handbooks titled My Healthy Woods, written specifically for inexperienced landowners. These award-winning books have reached over 40,000 landowners and collectively owning 6 million acres in Arkansas, Minnesota, New Jersey, Iowa, and of course, Wisconsin. So without further preamble, thank you very much for attending. Steve Swenson.
Thank you, Jennifer, for that nice introduction, and also for all the organization. I worked very closely with Jennifer, and she had a lot of details putting the colloquium together, so I was very happy to be part of it. So thank you for that. The work that I'm going to share tonight is heavily based in the social sciences, and that was something that I did not appreciate when I was going to college myself and interested in natural resources. I was very much about the sciences, very much about outdoors. I wanted to learn all I could about nature, and this is something I've come to later in life, which is the real appreciation for the social sciences, and I hope I set that hook pretty solidly when we get into the talk here. Our partners are many. My Wisconsin Woods is the public face of the public-private partnership that we have. So private landowners see My Wisconsin Woods. What we call ourselves as a group is the Driftless Forest Network. This work has been largely based until now in the southwest part of Wisconsin, in the Driftless area. And so that's why we have that group. Some of these groups have come in and out of our world over the years, but we've been operating for about 8 years or so, and have some really good lessons learned that I'll share tonight on the talk. How many people have read a Sand County Almanac or bits and pieces of it? I was hoping a lot of hands would go up in a room like this, in a building like this. But safe to say that without this little number, I wouldn't have a job. Aldo Leopold put his best work into a Sand County Almanac. It was his way to communicate to the masses what he cared about and why we should care about nature and include it in our lives and develop our own land ethic. So I want to start with a little bit of Leopold's words. If you haven't read a Sand County Almanac and you want to pick it up, it's a bunch of essays put together, and the first part is the almanac portion, which is he goes through the months of the year and has these observations in nature and then connects them to larger ideas and themes that he pulls out. That's probably the most approachable section, but it's when you get to the back where you really get to the philosophical part, the land ethic, and that was his clarion call to the masses about how we have to develop a relationship to nature. So let me just start with that. All ethics so far evolved rest upon a single premise, that the individual is a member of a community of interdependent parts. His instincts prompt him to compete for his place in that community, but his ethics prompt him to co-cooperate. The land ethic simply enlarges the boundaries of the community to include soils, waters, plants, and animals, or collectively, the land. A land ethic changes the role of Homo sapiens from conqueror of the land community to plain member and citizen of it. It implies respect for his fellow members and also respect for the community as such. So in Leopold's time, this is the landscape that they saw in southwest Wisconsin. Notice the horse there and the massive erosion. And then Coon Valley, Wisconsin, was our country's first watershed project. It's a 90,000 acre watershed. It's where the Natural Resources Conservation Service got its start as the Soil Erosion Service. So this is what Leopold writes about it, and then I'm going to switch to another book where he does treatment about the Coon Valley experience. Conservation is a state of harmony between men and land. Despite nearly a century of propaganda, conservation still proceeds at a snail's pace. The usual answer to this dilemma is more conservation education. No one will debate this, but is it certain that only the volume of education needs stepping up? Is not this formula too easy to accomplish anything worthwhile? It defines no right or wrong, assigns no obligation, calls for no sacrifice, implies no change in the current philosophy of values. So outside of a Sand County Almanac, he's got an essay called Coon Valley, An Adventure in Cooperative Conservation. Previous to 1933, the Bureau, and he's referring to the Soil Erosion Service at that time, and now Natural Resources Conservation Service, work had been to define and propagate an idea rather than to execute a task. It is to the lasting credit of this new Bureau that it immediately decided to use not one but all of remedial methods. It also perceived from the outset that sound soil conservation implied not merely erosion control, but also the integration of all land crops. Hence, after selecting certain demonstration areas on which to concentrate its work, it offered to each farmer on each area the cooperation of the government in installing on his farm a reorganized system of land use, in which not only the soil conservation and agriculture, but also forestry, game, fish, fur, flood control, scenery, songbirds, or any other pertinent interest were to be duly integrated. It will probably take another decade before the public appreciates either the novelty of such an attitude by a bureau or the courage needed to undertake so complex and difficult a task. I mean, that is really high praise from Leopold about what they were attempting to do in Coon Valley. And so in exchange for putting these practices on the ground for 5 years, they had to keep the practices on the ground for 5 years. After that, they could rip them out. And we're now 85 years later, and here's what the land looks like. And it still bears the mark of Leopold's work and Hugh Hammond Bennett and those in the Soil Erosion Service. And you might ask, how did they get this? And all the young people would say, social media. And you're right, they did. It was social media, if the media is a human being. So it was human beings going out on the land, meeting with private landowners, and selling ideas, and then helping landowners put those practices on the ground. They even had a one-act play called Old Man Erosion Gives Up, and it went viral. So it was standing room only. They did 15 performances in the watershed and really got the word out and had a lot of participation. But that is the essence of what we are trying to do, is trying to connect the work that we do in outreach with private landowners and make it more outcomes focused. It's really easy, or it's not really easy, but it's a pretty easy job to put together a publication and then just put it out there. It's a much harder proposition to put together a publication, put it out there, and then take the next step that you have to take with that landowner to move them toward action. And so if we want to get to the things that we care about, which is healthy forests, better watersheds, better wildlife, however you want to categorize that outcome, it is going to take a more concerted effort. And that's some of the work that we've done through My Wisconsin Woods partnership. Here's a map of the United States with all of the forest cover on it. The blue and the red really pop on here, but the green is all the private lands, private forestry. There is a ton of it in the eastern U.S., more than this map depicts. Like we did a handbook down in southern Arkansas. There's 1 million acres down there of private lands, and yet it's sort of dominated by the blue. Much of our work through My Wisconsin Woods to date has been in southwest Wisconsin. 40% of Wisconsin is privately owned, or 40% of Wisconsin is forested. And the reason why we got together as a group is we kept on doing our outreach, we kept on doing this kind of stuff, and the only people who were paying attention was the choir, the people that were already in our circle. And we really had to reach beyond them. And the rates of participation in major programs are not that high. And so we have financial assistance programs in the United States, both federal and in Wisconsin state programs. And the participation rates are quite low. Same thing with written management plans. When you take Wisconsin alone, everything that's clear on here is privately owned. So in Wisconsin, just as a case, if we are not effective in reaching private landowners, we are not doing conservation across Wisconsin. I mean, if we think the state is going to sort of carry the load for biodiversity or water quality, it's all the red land on there. That's it. And so our opportunity here in Wisconsin and what we've been trying to develop through My Wisconsin Woods is to chip away at the 140,000 landowners who own 10 or more acres and collectively have 5.5 million acres of forest land in Wisconsin. And the outcomes that we want are more action on the land. We want them to engage, become active on their property. It could mean any sort of thing. It could be invasive species control, wildlife habitat improvement, timber stand improvement, timber harvests, any number of outcomes there. The other thing we wanted to do is get better as a professional community. Again, many of our projects are sort of in isolation of one another. So not only are they not connected in time or space, they're not additive for the customer. And we really wanted to improve on that. So how do we get better and have continuous improvement? So I'm going to present the work that we do in 2 acts. We mush them together in a nice soup when we do this work ourselves, but I wanted to separate these two because it's 2 very important concepts when we think about the social dimensions of natural resources and how do we get better at engaging people. Because it really becomes customer-centric. And it's not about what I want to see. They're not doing the right thing for my reasons. They're doing the right thing for their reasons. And if the right thing is the right outcome, then it doesn't matter what their motivation is. And we use their motivation to get them there. So it's a much different way of thinking. So the first act is about identifying our customers. How do we target an audience? The second one is about how do we create behavior change and using the social sciences to get us there. So when it comes to identifying customers, there's a really great group out there. They're out in Massachusetts. They're great friends of ours, Sustaining Family Forests Initiative, who run tools for engaging landowners effectively. TELI for short. Just go to this website. You don't look up Sustaining Family Forests Initiative. I'm not sure why I mentioned that. You should just go to this website. I just wanted to give them credit. This is where all the good stuff is. They've got really neat resources on there, profiles of landowners. It's a lot of the social science. They get their data from the National Woodland Owners Survey. So there's a survey that's done nationally out to woodland owners. All that information comes into the Forest Service. They've distilled it and packaged it in ways that you and I can understand it and appreciate it and understand the landowners that are in Wisconsin better. They have developed typologies. And these are the types of landowners out there. Of course, there are shades of gray of landowners. There aren't just 4 types out there, but they end up to categorize themselves pretty nicely. And certainly people can change over time. But again, if we're going to try and get better at reaching people, we have to have some categories that we're going after. And if you look at this slide, they are 2 axes here. One that is about amenities, which is all the sort of the fun stuff that happens on property that you enjoy about your property. The other axis is financial, and so this would be caring most about financial aspects of ownership. This would be caring most about the amenity values. They have 4 categories: woodland retreat, working the land, supplemental income, and uninvolved. Taking them one by one, the uninvolved landowner maybe inherited the property, maybe they live down in Chicago, grandma, just has gotten older, doesn't go there anymore, she just become uninvolved. Their backs are to the camera, clearly they're not interested. They aren't very good targets. They're hard to reach. We're not sure even if we could reach them successfully, they would be very engaged. The next one is supplemental income. They are not growing a tree unless they're cutting it down for money at some point. That's their mindset. They may not even hunt on the property. They care so much about other aspects of their property in terms of financial return. This picture here in the middle, this comes from Telly, but that is sort of quintessential. You sort of picture southeast United States, very traditional tree farm, growing pine in rows, cutting them down. It's all timed on 27-year cycle or something. We have fewer of those in Wisconsin. Working the land, care about the amenities and the financial aspects somewhat equally. Really appropriate for managed forest law. So managed forest law is a tax abatement program in Wisconsin. If you enroll in the program, your taxes go down. You do have contractual harvests that have to happen on that properties. So sustainable forest management has to happen in exchange for that tax break. But for this particular landowner type, they've reduced their carrying costs. They have a harvest that is producing some income, hopefully. And amongst all that, they can maintain their values, their amenities. And then the last group is the woodland retreaters. So picture ex-urbanites, bought their 40, moving out into the country, super excited to go out there and retire. They are not cutting trees down to pay the taxes. No way. But survey says they will do timber management, which is, that's a hard ask for people, particularly in this group. They will do that if it benefits wildlife or some other amenity that they're enamored of. But it's got to be tied back to their value set. So that's where it's really important to get inside their heads and understand what motivates them. When we look across Wisconsin, the blue and the orange on here are the woodland retreaters and the working the landers who value amenities. You stack these two bars on each other and you're up, well over 75% of the landowners out there value the amenities of their woodlands in Wisconsin. You have to honor that when you go out to meet private landowners. That they do not just see this as boards and cords. That's really important. Across all of those categories, when you look at their reasons for owning woodlands, and this is for Wisconsin, 10 acres and more of woodland that they own, number one is wildlife. That's why they bought woods. Beauty, privacy, recreation. It's a lot of amenity there. And look where timber production is. Way down on the bottom. But that certainly does not mean you give up. Because if you are a forester or if you're a wildlifer, some of our best wildlife management is through forestry action, sustainable forest management. How else do you get a lot of light, sunlight on the ground, food, cover? Those manipulations change wildlife habitat dramatically and in ways that are impactful. We have found that on our property down at the Leopold Foundation. We've done a lot of nibbling around the edges. And as we've gone on in the years, and we've done more intensive management, including timber harvests, we're seeing better responses. And so we've got to get people to appreciate what it takes to maintain some of these values. Our other entry into this, not only knowing what they value, is where do they want to get their advice from? And so when we look at this, state or local government employees, that's the highest one of where their sources of advice. Preferred modes, talking to someone, having someone visit my land, written publications. It was from this data that we came up with this idea. We said, well, if that's what they want, let's give it to them. So here's how we targeted our audience in Wisconsin and through My Wisconsin Woods. We went to the tax rolls and we found who was in and out of managed forest law. So managed forest law, a lot of people are in it. There's 40,000 contracts out there right now. So through the tax rolls, you find immediately who is in and who's out of that program. And that's our proxy for engagement and unengagement for the most part. But we also have these other filters. So if they've done, government programs before or involved in education programs or membership in any of our organizations, we set them aside. We were really trying to find unengaged landowners. So we weren't spending marketing dollars on engaged people who are already in the choir. And we put together direct mail pieces. And again, before people run off and think that this marketing stuff is a little smarmy, because we sort of did when we first got started, to be honest, you cannot afford to be annoying to people through these means. We just do not have that much money. So we have mailed out thousands of mail pieces over the last 8 years. Literally, we have gotten back single digits that say, don't mail me again. So here's an example of a piece. This would be, this is a normal size postcard. I did not bring an example along with me, but it's a quad fold, so it's a regular size postcard, but then it unfolds into 4 sections. And this is the front cover. Are you getting what you want from your woods? Meet with your local forester to find out. And so this is a partnership with Department of Natural Resources. There are county foresters in each county, or state DNR foresters in each county, and they are available free of charge to go visit with landowners. And so we are promoting that opportunity through this mailer. That's our offer. It's branded. We make sure that we keep these materials branded. We have images that have a purpose. Turkey. There's piles of logs in here, but there's also little birds, plants. There's an easy call to action, so it is obvious that they rip this off, mail it in, postage is paid. We make it as low threshold as possible. And we do multiple waves. Again, you sort of feel bad about mailing and remailing people. The highest response rate is always the second time you offer. So if you're not doing more than one mailing, you are missing out on more than doubling your response rate. You got to hit them twice at least. And then non-technical language. I know in natural resources we have our own vernacular. You got to really work hard not to include it. We had real landowners read this thing, and if they got stopped on any word, we had them circle it. And if it was so important, we defined it right away, or else we got rid of it. So I would say, this is dripping with ecology, and yet the word is never in here. And that was really important to us. Here's our response rates. So with the free publication, 1 in 5 people said yes. With a forester that's going to come out and walk their property for free, 5% response rate. Any reactions? Yeah.
That blows my mind, honestly. I don't know, I'm a student, I'd rather not have to read some, because I got plenty to read. I'd rather talk to a forester, because that'd be cool. I don't know, maybe I'm young.
Steve, did you find any correlation with those that requested forester between people who are living on their property versus people whose residence is different than their property?
I'm not sure we've got a good handle on the absentee landowner. There's a lot of them out there. And sometimes it's hard to figure out which they are because sometimes they're absentee, but yet their tax bill does go to the property because they've got a cabin there. So we didn't really tease that apart too well. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a good answer for you. So I was explaining this to one of our donors at the foundation who's a business person down in Madison. And before I got to the punchline, because we had already sort of noodled on our own reasons why, he answered, I know why. I know why there's such a difference here. This is the more free offer. So sure, the Forester's free, but I got to call the person, I got to have a conversation, I might have to take some time off of work, I go out to the property to meet them. There's a lot of barriers to action, even though it's very attractive. So we thought the Forester was going to do better than the free information, but it didn't. And that's our suspicion why. It's very easy to send in a card and get this in the mail, and no one's going to be looking over my shoulder if I don't read it. And we assumed that they were not going to read it. That was why we made it, nice enough that they would feel bad throwing it away. Yeah.
How much did it cost to produce that?
Printing is about $1.50. Yeah.
Mailing about $1?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. $2.50, it's going out the door. Yeah. Yep. So the other thing that we get when people see the response rates is 5% seems really low. Well, it's beating the national average. So for nonprofits doing direct mail, you expect 1 to 4% response rate, and we got a 5. So we felt really good about that. We have repeated, well, the first thing was, did we find our target audience? And yes, we did. Once we got them into our circle, 90% of them were previously unengaged. The other thing is our response to direct mail, ranged from the Forester offer here to some other offers we don't need to go into, to the handbook. The highest it got was 22%, all of which beat the industry standard. So in all the mailings that we've done, we've gone out to about 12,000 landowners. 2,000 of them have raised their hand. Act 2, so that's just step 1. And that feels really great, but we assume they did not read this thing. So we have got to move on to step 2, Act 2, which is how do we get behavior change? And when it comes to this is not, where am I going to go to fast food tonight? Is it going to be this place or this place? These are about big decisions, this behavior change theory. This is where landowners or anybody is making decisions that require collecting a lot of information, takes time, emotion is involved. Picture buying a car. That's the kind of decision, big changes on your land or doing comprehensive management on your land. That's the level of decision we're dealing with here. Taking on invasive species on your property is not, a casual decision. Or if you make a casual decision, you probably won't make the same decision the next year. You have to be in it to win it. So we went to the theory, and this is the stages of change model. It also goes by the trans-theoretical model because these two authors down here in the corner, they not only use the stages of change, but they added all of these other elements to it, which I'll get to in just a moment. But it crosses all these theories in that they kind of mashed it into one. There's some really nice chapters out there and books about this model, and it's been utilized in, just imagine, anti-smoking campaigns, recycling, weight loss, health care, birth control. All of these social issues can use this same model and work through it. So to go through it, pre-contemplation, people don't even know that there's decisions to be made on their land. Yeah, I have property, I have woods, I love walking the trails. That's it. We got to get them to just even contemplating that there's things they could be doing on that property. And so there's basic awareness. Once you start realizing, well, invasive species, how much time is that going to take? Oh, you mean there's cost share? So it's there's this decisional balance that happens, the barriers, the benefits. And how does that shake out? Influence of peers also becomes very important. So they're talking to their neighbors. Well, the neighbor next door is not doing anything about garlic mustard, so it doesn't pay to do anything. Into preparation, what do I need to take action? Well, I've got to have the chemical, I've got to have a backpack sprayer, I've got to have the right weather. There's a lot that goes into that before you get to actually the action. So self-efficacy is my perception of whether I can do this task or not, but it is also external self-efficacy, which is, does the store have the chemical that I need? Do they have the sprayer that I need? Or can I get a loan for the car? There's a lot of factors that go into that. The old model, because we didn't have this model, the old model was, hey, Steve, produce something like this, and it's going to, landowners are just going to take action. It does not work that way. Once we get through action, then it's into maintenance. So what is the first thing that you think you're going to do when you drive off the lot in your new Subaru Forester? What's the first thing that we do when we make a big decision? Celebrate. I'm on a college campus. We celebrate. Well, it's this cognitive dissonance. We question whether we made the right choice. We want to see all the Subaru Foresters out there on the road. So we're driving around like, oh yeah, there's one. And there's one. And I'm making the right choice. And then, then you get into behavior control. So this relapse piece, this becomes really important for drug addiction, obviously, because there is a very strong force that's going to pull somebody out of this cycle. And so that maintenance becomes very, very important. The best analogy in our world is probably invasive species. It is hard to maintain invasive species control over time. What we did is we developed our own model for Wisconsin and our partnership. So you can see a corollary here, awareness with getting somebody from pre-contemplation to contemplation. Once they're at contemplation, they learn more, take a first step, preparation, I'm making a plan, action, and then maintenance is we consider having a big action. It was really important as we built this model that our landowner, again, customer-centric mindset is on the left-hand side of the page. That's where we started. This is how we started our diagram. It did not start with us. And then what we did is we threw all of the stuff that we do at the page, and where does it fit? And so UW Extension is doing some of this work, Leopold Foundation is doing some of this work, RC&Ds are doing some of this work. We all fit in different places. DNR is doing different work. And you start to see, where are the connections? So, you mean when people sign up for an e-newsletter, I should really be trying to get them to attend a workshop. And if I get them to a workshop, we should really be pushing a Forester walkthrough. It starts to line these things up in time and space and among partnerships that really can have a benefit and make an additive contribution to each other's work. The last piece we had, and this gets very cluttered. I'm sorry I didn't turn this into an easier to digest graphic, but this is as we developed it. The other thing that was really fun that popped out of here is, there's these categories of work. So acquisition, some group, some collection of groups needs to be out there actively acquiring new landowners. That's somebody's job. That doesn't just happen. You could have all the foresters in the world sitting here waiting for the phones to ring, but if we're not building that business, that funnel at the far end, we're not driving them to that next step. And then there's this work in the middle, which is about cultivating landowners. Again, people do not just read this publication, and even though there's a chapter on timber harvest, they will not just go out and cut their timber down and do a harvest. It's just not that easy. And so there's this period of cultivation. And then, of course, we get to implementation and the action steps. What was really cool is, as we developed this, it really fell out that, the nonprofits, the groups that, like mine, the Aldo Leopold Foundation, the RC&Ds, we're small. We don't have a big staff, but we are really good at getting the word out. We can put together publications like this and mail these out and get the word out and build and acquire new contacts. When it comes to this cultivation and you have to meet landowners out on the land, Boy, the state government can knock that one out of the park. There's a forester in every county. They visit people for free. It's perfect. And then that leads into a referral right to the private sector. The consultants, loggers, if there's going to be a timber harvest, but there's a handoff there. As we started to get into what we were going to ask people to do next, and we went back to the research. So this is, again, out of Telly, and the light green is intend to do, so intentions, and the dark green is have done in the past 5 years. Any observations?
Well, there's not that much difference between what they have done the last 5 years and what they intend to do. There isn't a lot of discrepancy.
Not a lot of difference, except for improved wildlife habitat, trail construction, invasive species. And so we took that intentionality and tried to put it into words and the next offer. So these are people who had been in our circle already. They had had a forester visit, or they had gotten the publication. Most of them it was with the forester visit. And so we thought they were primed to take the next step, which was to sign up for government financial assistance to do management on their property. It's a nice hook. It's a great offer. The money is good. They'll be glad they did it. If you look at those programs, people who have done those programs do those programs again. We just got to get new people into those programs. So, here's what we did. Your neighbors save money controlling invasive species and improving wildlife habitat. Don't miss your chance. We took that right off the other slide.
Fear of missing out.
Fear of missing out. Social norm. So your neighbors save money. Self-efficacy. And then the call to action is meant to be pretty clear. Deadline, contact this person. Ask about this. And in this particular case, it's the NRCS, Natural Resources Conservation Service, their cost share funding. And so we've worked pretty hard to move people along the stages of change model or through this and get them to action. But certainly the only thing you know that when they got this is they got the information. We don't expect publications to do much more than that. We don't know if they understood it. That's why we offered them a forester. So on the heels of getting this, because this ended up to be a pretty big net. We got 20% of the population to take this. So then on the heels of this, we offered them a forester. And we got a really nice response to that. We just did some work in northeast Iowa, very, very similar. We did a handbook for them. We mailed, the way we did it in Wisconsin is we mailed this, if they asked for it, we mailed it out to them. And then the following season, 6 or 8 months later, we offered them a forester. The way we did it in northeast Iowa, just weeks ago, is mailed them a handbook. Everybody in our target audience mailed them a handbook. And then we immediately followed up with the forester offer. And we got a 10% response rate to the forester. So those foresters are swimming in contacts, which is really great. So reported likelihood, next 5 years. Again, this was lessons we were trying to learn as we go and feed information, social information back into the group because this is all new to us. So we do have a control group out in the Driftless that we've never touched. They've never gotten a mailing from us. And we can go to the government cost share programs and find out whether they signed up or not. We also went to them with our survey, and they filled it out. So we found out how likely they were to do these things. This is the recipient for, this color green is the recipient of the handbook, and the forester is the darker green. And you can see, again, there is value in stepwise getting professionals out on the land because there's a greater likelihood things are going to happen out there. And that's intentions. And here's our action on the ground. So we were able to get the lists of landowners that did the government financial assistance, and they signed up at a rate of 3 to 30%, depending on which cohort they were in our mailings. This ends up to be the handbook people. This is the forester people. And then this was when we had a peer group out there. So landowners meeting with landowners. Very, very efficient at selling ideas, as you can imagine. The contemplation phase, peer contact, very important. Hard to maintain, but it really worked well. But compare that to the 0.5% in our control group that signed up for cost share. So really doing quite well in motivating people to action. I would encourage you after the talk to go to our website. This is the My Wisconsin Woods homepage. We designed this for landowners. And so these big buttons, this is stuff that we really, and we talked about this a lot. What do they want from us? Be anticipatory of the questions that are on their mind. And so I just bought some land. What's next? How do I keep my woodland healthy? Can I get help with my taxes and finances? And should I harvest my trees? One of our most visited pages, what are my trees worth? People want to know. Quickly, the fellowship. It's been mentioned earlier by Jennifer. We just built a brand new facility. It got finished last year. This year is going to be our second cohort in there. Really wonderful facility. It's just a stone's throw from our headquarters, complete with greenhouse. So if anybody's a greenhouse nut, you'll have a playground. But great program. What we've added to it that's new, because we've been doing this for many, many years, what we've added to it that's new is this idea of conservation leadership. And so there are a few publications out there that have identified what defines conservation leadership. What do leaders in conservation need to have? And we've tried to include some of that curriculum into our program so that it's more than just the land management, more than just the environmental education, but gets into aspects of leadership development. So I'd encourage you to apply. Those positions are announced on our website at Aldo Leopold Foundation. And then lastly, be our Valentine. We'd love to have you join our circle. We do Facebook, we do Twitter, Instagram. What do you want? We got it. Any questions? Yeah.
Can we take one of those home?
Yes, you may. Yep. There's a stack here which implies take. Not these two publications, though. Yeah.
Out of Facebook, Twitter, and other social media, like what does your organization get the most hits or views off of? People like Facebook, or I'm just curious.
Well, our website, we're talking Aldo Leopold Foundation website, gets a lot of hits nationwide because people are researching about Aldo Leopold, the land ethic, so that's hundreds of thousands of hits. Yeah. We have, on Facebook, we have about 17,000 followers, so, which isn't bad for small.
As your foresters meet with individual landowners and families, do you find that they're open to the idea of using prescribed burns in terms of controlling and regeneration of their forested lands, or is there maybe a different attitude still out there in the general public?
Well, certainly down in the driftless, there's a lot of burning on private lands, a lot. And we used to do some of that and still do a little bit. We certainly do on our own property. I used to do a lot of it myself. So when it comes to oak and oak management and trying to develop that because we are losing it, it seems like it's a piece of the puzzle. Because we have a lot of oak forests, hickory forests converting to maple, basswood, and it's not only about promoting the oak, but it's also about demoting some of the other species that are fire intolerant, and fire is a great way to do that. I'm not sure anybody's developed the recipe yet, but fire is used a lot in southwest Wisconsin. Primarily for prairie and savanna, I think, but that is developing a comfort for it, being proactively put out on the land, and so using it for more silviculture. There's a number of really intelligent folks within the DNR and outside the DNR promoting those ideas. And so landowners, a lot of dudes are pyromaniacs. I mean, it's just it's just the reality of it. We run into down in southwest Wisconsin what some of us refer to as sport burners. And so they want to paint it black, and really it comes back to what are the outcomes, and really forcing them to state those clearly, that they don't need to burn every single year. And so it's that balance. But there's a lot of interest in that, I think, certainly in southwest Wisconsin. Yeah.
So when you started doing this outreach, like changing for clients had done it before, was there a person that kind of charged it and made that change, or saw that? How did that change become, start looking more at the social sciences?
Oh gosh, that is a great question. There are people and personalities and organizations that were at the front end of that. A couple I'll mention is this really got kicked off with the American Forest Foundation, which is a national organization, coming to us in Wisconsin with this problem, recognizing that we had a really strong history of private lands forestry in Wisconsin, and maybe we could address this issue. So that was one influence that was very important to begin with, and AFF is still very involved in this work in Wisconsin, just in different ways. The other one is we had a social scientist that was really involved and could churn out the charts and graphs and make sense of the data, and that's Tricia Gorby, who is now with UW Extension, but previously was with the Bureau of Research at DNR. So there were some influencers there for sure. Yeah, Scott.
You were working with that group in the bottom left, the unmotivated, and I'm curious about the group that's straight above that, those that really have an appreciation for the aesthetic aspects of the land. They'd be very willing to do things, but I'm curious if they're knowledgeable about what to do, if they're still worthwhile engaging.
Well, I didn't make that super clear, Scott. Sorry about that. We are working with any of those four typologies, and truthfully, most of them are in that woodland retreat and working the land, amenity interest landowners. Okay. It's pretty uncommon for one of the foresters to go out there and they're in a guise there, and not hunting is not an interest for them. So they are interested in hunting on the property. That's a very common theme. So we work with them. I think that the group that's been a little bit harder to get at and we don't do as many visits with is farmers. And those where the primary relationship to the land is on an annual basis with crops. There's less interest in sort of re-gearing, I think, that thinking for the forested land. Yeah.
I guess, I don't know if I'd make a comment or a question, but with the groups you're talking about there, and with the high percentage that have an interest in wildlife as one of their main goals, would you suggest that for foresters, one of the better trainings they might have would be trainings in how to manage for specific wildlife species so that they can meet those landowner objectives more effectively?
Amen.
And if you're interested, we offer that. That's loaded.
I'm not in control of those training decisions, but I can put you in touch with the folks at DNR who are, and maybe you already have those contacts. But yeah, it is a wonderful connection, and foresters should be trained in how to apply their tools to 4 different outcomes, and not just the economic return on timber and fiber. So, one example, your training is a great example, and that should be pursued if possible. Another one is forestry for the birds. So there are publications that have been done in other states, but there are parties in Wisconsin who are interested in these. But one of them is out east. I think that's the one that got its start. Then there's one for southeast Ohio. But really, they're trying to connect up. If I did this forest management practice on my property, I would get and benefit these birds. And it's a great, again, whatever that landowner's motivations are, and if they are in fact that heavily oriented toward wildlife, let's connect the two and not waste another minute doing it differently. Yeah?
Does the DNR have enough foresters to make all these land assets?
Yeah. Yep.
We just hear about all the cuts that were made. So.
So there's a forester basically in every county. So in the 72 counties, there's a lot of foresters out there. We work very closely with DNR. They're very good friends of ours. We know how many hours they have in their work plans to meet with private landowners. We've done the math. They basically have time for 3,000 landowner visits a year across Wisconsin, which, is a lot. So, and we have goals, we collectively as a partnership, we do have goals that involve those 3,000 in addition to 1,000 procured elsewhere through private consultants and other groups that are doing visits, maybe onesies, twosies, and a dozen here. But collectively, we're hoping that we can hit about 4,000 a year for 5 years. And then over 5 years, that's 20,000 landowner visits that have been accomplished with DNR, the major backbone in that.
So are most of your efforts going into the southwestern part of the state, or are you really statewide?
Okay, great question. Thanks for bringing that up. So a lot of this was done as a pilot study down in the southwest part of Wisconsin. But we are on the cusp of going statewide with ambition. And so that means that the website has to look a little bit different and function a little bit different. But I spent most of the day with a DNR person down at the Wicked Willow, and we were figuring out all sorts of plans for the coming year about promotion statewide. What do we need to do to get geared up to make that happen? It involves much more than just her and I, but nonetheless, we're excited about it. So yeah, we want to make this a statewide resource. Yeah.
In the 6-step model that you had on the slide before, it was a circle. So do you find that folks who get to that 6th step and take an action eventually come back into the cycle with greater awareness, and they want to maybe take a different action? So people who did a timber harvest maybe come back and say, tell me more about invasives, or something of that nature.
You are exactly right. That is exactly how we need to approach this. So again, just like my director 10 years ago would have said, we'll just produce this and then we'll get action on the land. And we know that that does not happen. The same is true with a hard ask like a timber harvest. So picture a landowner that's a woodland retreater. They bought the land because there's trees on it, and now you're asking them to cut the trees off of it. They're not going to do that as a first step. Will they do that as a third or a fourth step? After a good relationship and some successes that came before that, the odds are better. The survey says that yes, they will. All 4 of those categories cut trees. It's just the motivations and then when. And so, and I've been involved in trainings for the foresters, the DNR foresters. We shared a lot of this information, the social sciences, and really tried to get them comfortable with being able to go out there to a landowner and have a visit with them. And if what they arrive at is invasive species control, that's fine. We have a contact. We can come back to them over time. they don't have to, swing for the fences and timber harvest or bust. So that's a really important point, and that's not easy to. That's not easy, when your job is to, again, be a forester and sort of produce boards and cords. It's stopping short of that and feeling successful is, it doesn't feel that good, I guess, unless we validate that we need time for that to mature. Yeah.
There is a bit of a pricing model change, though, that's actually allowing this to happen within the state now. When it was literally boards and cords driving how the billing model with the client was, that was one window. Another window is where you actually are not necessarily billing based on timber sale returns, but you're essentially billing on a per acre or per activity basis. And I'm seeing more people taking that approach. They're worrying less about the volume that's generated as long as it's commercial, and more about how to actually get a landscape change. So, that's actually facilitating a lot of this happening.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thanks so much.